Okay, so today we're going to work on lesson 3. Lesson 3 is about using basic shapes to construct an illustration. Some of the shapes have already been created for us. The background map of the little island and islets or islands has already been made for us. But what we're going to do is we're going to make the sailboat. We're going to make the mountains. We're going to make the little diamond with the stars. We're going to make the X that marks a spot and the little crossbones. That's what we're going to do today. Okay. So what the book asks you to do is to start with a brand new file. So to do that, if you go to File, New, and the size that they want is very specific. So by default, the units are in points, but I'm going to switch to inches. And the default size is letter size. So the width, I'm going to make 6 inches. That's the size that they want. And then the height is going to be 4 1/4, 4.25 inches. Okay. Now, they also recommend a bleed. And by default, a bleed is 1/8 of an inch. A bleed should always be 1/8 of an inch. It's been that way forever in printing. And it should be the same around all the borders, but they allow you to make changes to it. The bleed can be larger, smaller, if you wish. As soon as this opens up, I will show you what a bleed is and explain that in greater detail. The other thing that I should probably make mention of too is that the default for raster effects, remember I did that the first day in my tour of Illustrator, showing you the difference between vector and raster images, is that I use the 72 pixel image, but for print, high resolution, it's 300 pixels per inch. So by default, if we rasterize anything, it's going to use 300. The other thing is that since this is designed for print, we're using CMYK color. If we were designing this for the web, you would want to use RGB, and you would want the raster image effects to be 72 pixels per inch. Just to give you a heads up or to let you know. So now I can click and I can create a brand new piece of paper here. And you'll notice that the piece of paper this is the 6 by 4 1/4 that we selected. But notice the little red box or band around the outer side. That is the bleed. And what a bleed is in printing is that if you wish a part of an image or even the background color to go all the way to the edges, you, in fact, for the printers, you need to exceed the distance of the edge and you go all the way to the bleed so that when the printer prints it and they trim the paper, because they don't print the paper on an exact 6 by 4 1/4 sheet of paper, it's on a much larger sheet of paper, and then they trim it to size. So to make sure that that image or part of that image touches each edge, the edge that you want to bleed, you need to make sure that you've given the printer enough wiggle room, as it were, so that in the event they, are off just by, it could be a 64th of an inch or a 32nd of an inch, that it will still bleed all the way to the edge. Okay, so that's what that's about. Okay, doke. So I'm going to jump to another image that I've already created here. Okay, notice that I've already spent some time creating the shapes that we're going to make today. Well, what I'm going to do at the moment, you can see that we have our little start file over here. We're going to put this image at the very end of our exercise inside here, and then we're going to take these little shapes that we create and add them to our map over here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create another artboard here. So what I can do is I can drop down to my artboard tool, which is right here. This is one way of doing it. And with this one selected, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to click the add button here, and it's going to add a brand new artboard. Okay. And I'm going to take this one and move it down. And I'm going to take this one and move it over so that we can work from scratch. And this is, these little images down here are my backup in case I screw up, to be perfectly honest, just to let you know. So I'm done with that. Let me go back over here. And I click the selection tool, and it takes me back to our start. So the first image that they want us to make is the little X that marks the spot. So we're going to start with a basic rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in, and the size of the rectangle that they want us to make is 2 by 2 inches or by 1/2 inch. So if I move my cursor over to the toolbar and I select the rectangle tool, and we can do this a couple of different ways. Again, it depends on how comfortable you feel working. Let me go ahead and move this. I got to move these little images of you guys around a little bit. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click and drag diagonally. And as I do that, notice in the lower right-hand corner that there's a little gray box with the width and the height. So if I move my mouse to the right, you can see that I can move it up to 1/2 inch, and I can move it down to 2 inches. Okay? And if I'm off just a little bit, which I am, it's not a big deal, because if I look at the properties panel, at the very top here, you can see that we have our X and Y coordinates based on this little widget, which is at the center. And I also have the width and the height here. So since it isn't exactly 0.5 by 2 inches, I can go back in here and I can put in the actual numbers, so 0.5, and I can go in here. I got to make sure that this is unlinked, and I'm going to go ahead and the height I'll put in 2 inches. There we go. So it's exactly, and I mean exactly, 1/2 inch wide by 2 inches. So you can either use the little widget below, or you can, and I do this all the time if the exact size is important. I use the properties panel. You also have the properties panel at the top, or the options menu at the top. I could have done that the same here as well. You'll notice that I have the shape size is 0.5 inches by 2 inches. So I can do that up here. Okay. So another way that I didn't mention the other day to deselect is if you hold down the Command key and click, you can deselect. So if I select, whoops, let me go back here. Select tool. If I select, and while I'm on this, if I hit Command and I click, whoops, Command and hit Return, my mistake. I'm mistaken. Never mind. So anyway, I've deselected that. I want to show you another way of making objects. And that is, again, I'll select the rectangle tool again. By default, it makes a shape diagonally. So, you can make it from the top left to the bottom right, or if you prefer making it, from top right to the bottom left, it's up to you, whichever way you want to work. But another way to work is to hold down the Option key. And I'm going to hold down the space bar, and that allows me to move it. If I hold down the Option key, notice that it makes the shape from the center outward. And sometimes that can be a better way, or a more advantageous way of making the shape, from the center outward. If you want to constrain the proportions, meaning if I wanted to make sure that this was a perfect square, I could also hold down the Shift key. And now you'll notice that it locks into the square format. And that's true for the Ellipse Tool as well and some of the others. That if you want to make the shape from the center outward, pull down the Option key or Alt key on the PC. And if you want to constrain the proportions so that it is a perfect square or circle, hold down the Shift key as well. And then you have your shape. Okay. And then you can always use the Options menu up here to resize, or you can use the Properties panel to resize as well. So the next step that they want us to do here is they want us to rotate this shape. So by selecting it, we could use the rotation tool, but oftentimes it's really unnecessary because if I move with the object selected, if I move the mouse over the corner, notice that I get a double arrow. And that allows me to, to move over here, and as I click and I drag, I can rotate it. Well, they want us to rotate it at 45 degrees. Well, again, if you hold down the Shift key, it will lock in at the 45 degrees, which is actually 315 degrees in a 360-degree circle. If I continue to rotate, notice it locks in again by holding down the Shift key at 90 degrees. So I want it to be just 45 degrees. And it's locked in perfectly. You don't have to measure it. However, if I do want to change that rotation, I have, again, under the Properties panel over here, I can put in the specific number of degrees that I want it to rotate. And typically you rotate things at, 30 degrees, 45, 90. They're, pretty standard. But if it's an odd one, if it has to be rotated 13 degrees or 47 or 52 degrees, you can always lock in those numbers right here. Okie doke. So the next thing that they want us to do is they want us to begin to curve the corners. And how we do that is you'll notice that these little widgets right on the inside of each corner. Well, what I want to do is I want to click and I drag and I want to pull that in and see how the corners are rounded now. So these are active or live shapes. Well, I want not all four corners to be rounded, but every other corner to be rounded and the others to be perfectly square. So to show you an example, let me go back to the finished version here. Let's look at the end version and zoom in a little bit. Okay, you see what I'm talking about here, so that it's just rounded at one point and not the other. Okay, that's what we're going to do here. So let's go back here. And to do that, what you need to do is there's a little tiny little accessory, open the appearance panel right here. So under appearance, or actually over here, let's do this one, not the appearance, but under the transform, it's these little three dots. When I click right there, you'll notice that these four boxes here allow me to change the rotation or the curvature of the corners independently. So right now they are linked together. So if I change one, like so, they all change. Okay, but I don't want that. I want to be able to do them independently. So I'm sorry, I gotta go back here. I gotta click this one. There we go. So I'm gonna unlink them and I'm gonna change this one here. Okay, whoops, I didn't want it that. Let's go back. That should be unlinked. There we go. Let's see, which one? It's the other way around. There we go. But it's easy enough to change. So I make sure it's selected. I go back up here and click. And I want this one to be, there we go. And we'll change this one. Let's change this one. This is, that little window goes away when you're done. So I want that to be curved. I want this one to be curved. I want it to be the same, so let's make that 5. 0.25. Okay, and then these, I want to be none. There you go. Okay. So it took me fussing with it for a couple minutes. If you're looking directly at the book and putting in their numbers, you could, and I don't even know that my numbers are exactly the same as theirs. But let me go ahead and change this so that they are identical to 5. Okay. Make this one 204. So that they're identical. It's not a big deal. I'm just being a little futzy about it. Okay. So I can deselect now. And I have the first part of my shape. And I already colorized it, but to colorize it, all you have to do is make sure that the shape is selected. And then in the upper right-hand corner, the swatches panel, make that visible. And then just click on whatever color you would want. They want us to make it this deep red right here. Okay. Now we're ready to duplicate this. So to duplicate this shape, all you have to do is copy it or Command-C. And then what you want to do is go to Edit, top here. And I want to say that I want it to paste in place. And now I'm going to rotate. But I'm going to rotate, whoops, rotate. And again, hold down the Shift key. And it locks that one in place. So now I have an exact duplicate. And what I can do is I can go back up here again and we can pick a little bit different. Whoop, I don't want a pink. I want more of a reddish color. Are these the exact colors that they want? I don't know. It's really not that important. Okay. So that's the first, set of shapes that we make. Did I do it right? Yeah, I think so. Okay. Now, it would be a good idea. You don't have to, but since we talked about this the other day, since we see this as not two shapes, but as one object now, to select them both and to hit Command-G to group them, and I'll set them aside. Okay. So there we have our shape. The next one is we're going to start to make our sailboat. So first shape that we want to make in creating our sailboat is we're going to make the mast. And again, it's a rectangle. So we're going to start with a rectangle tool. And I'm going to click and I'm going to drag like so. And it's a very small one. It's about, if I remember the dimensions correctly, and I don't, it's what is it? It's not important. It is, but it's not. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take the stroke and I'm going to remove it so that I have no stroke. And I'm going to make the height approximately 1 inch tall. And I'm going to make the width about 0.1 inches. Okay, so it's very, very small. Okay. And now what I want to do is I want to zoom in a little bit. And again, I'm going to go ahead and I want to round the top of this like so. But you'll notice that the bottom is rounded. Well, I don't want the bottom rounded. So what I need to do is click on that little widget again under the transform. It's the little 3 dots. And I'm going to take the bottom ones and I'm going to, let's see. make sure that they are, no, wrong one. It's this one. There we go, they're flat. So it's a way of controlling curvature of shapes without having to do anything fancy. They give us these nice little live tools to do that. Okay, so we have our mask created using some of the same features that we did before. Actually, what I'm going to do though is I'm going to select this, and I'm going to bring up the this, and I'm going to make my swatches panel, and I'm going to add a color to it. So I'm going to make sure that the fill is selected. It's down here, and I'm going to make it this kind of deep brown. Okay, maybe this one is a little bit better. Okay. So there's the shape of our mask. The next step is to make, again, with another live shape, we want to make the hull of the boat. So I'm going to move this down a little bit, click and drag and move it down. And we're going to use the Ellipse tool to make the hull of the boat. So I'm going to select the ellipse. And the size of the ellipse, we want it to be 0.5 by 1.5 inches. So if I click and I drag like so, we'll make the width close to 1.5 and by 0.5, and I'm just going to put in the numbers here. So the width, I'll go ahead and put in 1.5 inches. And we're going to make this 0.5. Okay. You want to be precise. This, I think, is just the easiest way to do that. Now, this is a live shape. It doesn't have to be an ellipse. It could be a circle. But if you see this little widget right here on the right-hand side, I can click and drag, and I can change that. So now it is, in fact, a half circle. But it's not exactly half. So again, I want it to be more precise. And when I come back in here, notice that I have this live here. I can make this exactly 180. Okay. So I basically cut this circle in half. If I want to change it anytime, if I wanted to come back and make this 45, I could do that. So if I want to cut a little slice out of my ellipse, I can do it that way. Instead, we're just going to make it perfect. We cut in half. Now, there are other ways of cutting shapes in half as well, but that's how we're doing this one. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. I want to make another shape on top of this one. Now, I'm doing it a little bit differently than the book because this is the outside of our hull. What we want to do is we want to make a little ellipse on the inside of our boat. Well, I'm going to do it. One of the ways that I talked about is that if you go ahead and with, let me show you. It's under Select or View, and it's down here, and it says Smart Guides. That is automatically checked. And when Smart Guides came out years ago, I found them to be really kind of awkward, and now I can't work without them. They're really, really very helpful. And let me show you what I mean by that. That as I move over the center of this, you can see here's the anchor right here. So that lets me know that's the middle of the circle. So if I hold down the Shift key and I drag, I know that it has the same proportions. And when I move over the edge, notice that the little pink line appears. So I know it's exactly the same width as my ellipse. So what I can do now, without any muss or fuss, I can go ahead and for the path, and I'm going to change the path up here. We're going to change it to this little orangish shape right here. Okay. Now, if we look in here, and this is getting very picky, but I want you to see this. Notice how the shape, the path, that orange path extends beyond this a little bit. Well, you can control how paths are applied outlines are applied to paths. And to do that, I need to go to the window menu and I need to bring up stroke panel. Okay, so here's a stroke panel. And I'm going to go over here and I want to say show options because that's kind of important. So with the shape selected, notice down here under align stroke, by default, the stroke is equal on either side of the path. If you want, I could make it entirely on the outside of the stroke by clicking on this little button. Or in our particular instance, I want it to be on the inside of the stroke. And you can see that by doing that, notice right here that it is a perfect match now. And I mean perfect. Okay. So that's another little insight. And if I want to, I can go ahead and I can change the width of that afterwards, like so. And again, they give us the dimensions for that. And I forget the dimensions. It's okie doke. So we have our boats created. I can go ahead and I can zoom out a little bit. We don't have the sail created yet. We'll do that in a minute. But I'm going to go ahead and select both of these objects, and I'm going to move them down. And again, to make sure that the mast is directly centered, the smart guides and aid us in doing that. Kind of nice. Okay. So about creating polygons or smart objects. Some of these smart objects are live objects, and as I mentioned, we'll start again with a circle. If I click and I drag and I hold down the shift key, it's a perfect circle that I can go ahead not only for ellipses, but I can control whether I want it to be 360 degrees or just partial. And this is editable at any time. Now, in addition to that, we have another tool. I can close the strokes panel now. But we have the polygon tool. And by default, it's a pentagon or hexagon. Actually, it was a pentagon. I don't know. There we go. But if you want to change the number of sides, you use your up and down arrows on the lower right-hand corner of your keyboard. So I'm clicking and dragging, and I have not let go of the mouse yet. Once you let go of the mouse, it's a done deal. Well, no, it isn't. You can go back and change. But you would use the properties panel for that. And that's relatively new. So what I want is a triangle. So I'm going to hit my down arrow 3 times. And if I hold down the shift key, notice how it locks it in, like so. And I have my nice little triangle here. So you can create a polygon with as many sides as you want, or as few sides as 3. So I have my perfect little triangle here. What I can also do is I can come over here now with the polygon. Let's close this. And I can control with this the size of this. I have the width and the height. Well, again, we can either change it or manipulate it by hand, or we can put in the numerical values of it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put in the values that they specify. And I'm also going to go ahead with the swatches panel, and I'm going to change the gray. And I'm going to make sure that the fill of this is selected. And I'm going to make it, I think it was a 30% gray. Yep, 30% gray. So there we go. Okay, and we want the stroke to be none. So I'll make the stroke none. And they want the height to be 1.2 inches. How they're coming up with these odd sizes, I don't know. But we'll go ahead and do that. I'll make it 1.2 inches. And I want, that's the width. Sorry, the width needs to be 0.8 inches. 0.8. No. Yeah, the width is 1.2. My mistake. 1.2. 1.2. This is where I get hung up when they give me specific sizes. And we want the height to be 0.8 inches. 0.8. There we go. Okay, so this is what we're starting to do is we're going to make our little diamond shape. If we look down here, this is what we're making right here. Okay. Well, we have two parts to this. We have the top part of our diamond, and we have the lower part. Well, I'm going to use the top part to make our bottom part. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use under the, not the rotation tool, but the reflect tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my cursor right on the bottom line here, and I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I'm going to click. And what I want to do is I'm going to select Preview. Right now, vertical is selected, but if I select horizontal, you can see that it's going to flip it right about that edge. If I click OK, all it has done is it's taken that shape and flipped it. But because I want another duplicate shape that's mirrored, I'm going to select Copy. So now I have a duplicate that is mirrored based on the other one, a perfect copy of it. Now we're going to take the top one and I'm going to change the fill of it to 10%. Okay, so we can see the difference between the two. But now what I want to do is you'll notice that it's slightly cut off. It's been chopped, the top of it has been chopped off. The way the book has chosen to do that is to use the eraser tool. So I'm just going to move the eraser tool here over to the left or to the right, doesn't matter. And as I move it across, because I tend to, not have a very sure hand when I'm using my mouse, if I want to make sure that it goes absolutely horizontal, I'm going to hold down the Shift key. And then as I click and I drag, it's perfectly horizontal. So now I've cut it apart into two shapes. Now I can take this shape, the top one, and I can get rid of it. Okey-doke. So now we have the two parts of our diamond. We're going to make the little diamond shapes in a couple of minutes. But what I want to do next is I'm going to use this shape to make our mountain. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click and drag. And as I drag, I'm going to hold down the Option key, and it's going to make a copy of it. Now what I can do is I can, in my Properties panel, notice that I want to flip it again. So I'm going to flip it again along the vertical axis. So now I have another way of flipping it. So if I click that, it flips. And I have another tool, because this is no longer an equilateral triangle. But if I want it to be an equilateral triangle, I can come down here and notice that, again, by clicking on this little Options button here, I can say I want to make all sides equal. I don't have to worry about measurements. It does it automatically for me. So that's pretty cool. Now I can go in. Let's zoom in a little bit. See what we're doing here. And what I want to do is I want to make the top of our mountain curved a little bit. But notice that it curves the bottom parts as well. I don't want that. So if I select the Direct Selection tool, you'll notice that I have, again, if I select one part, they're all affected. And I don't want to do that. If I click on one and I hold down the Shift key and I click on the other, and then I move them out, notice that it makes these angles sharp, but it leaves the top one curved. So that for whatever reason, with the triangles, it works a little differently than the squares. I can't control the corners separately by using this little widget here. It doesn't allow me to do that. So I don't know if that's a flaw in the program, or maybe it's changed. No, it hasn't, because we're using 2020. Okay. So now I have my little mountain shape. And we'll change the colors of that later on. The next step they want us to do is we're going to make the little stars. We're going to go back to our diamond shape here, and we're going to make these stars. Similar to making a polygon shape, to be able to add or subtract hold on here. I'm getting kind of nuts about this. I want to make sure that this is nice and clean. There we go. Move that over. So we want to make our little star shapes. So to make the star shapes, we're going to come over here to our polygon and hold down, and I'm going to use the star tool. By default, it's kind of a cowboy, sheriff's 5-star. If you want more points, you hit the up arrow. And you can make as many points as you want. If you want fewer points on your star, hit the down arrow on your keyboard in the lower right-hand corner. Well, we want 6 for ours. Okay, 6-sided. That's what the book wants us to do. Now, we can control the inner dimensions and the outer dimensions. If I hold down the Option key, notice how that changes. If I hold down the Control key, the Command key, sorry, notice that the inner dimensions remain intact, but the outer dimensions are getting a little bit larger. See how I can control the diameter so that my points are very small, or they're really exaggerated, like we have here. Okay, so that's how you control that. And now I can go back with the selection tool, and I can just go down and hold down the Shift key, and I can resize this. And we want this to be white. We want the fill to be white in here. Now I'm going to move this over here. There we go. And again, if you want to resize it from the center, hold down the Option key. And it will resize it. Hold down the Shift key to constrain the proportions. Likewise. And if you want to duplicate it, hold down the Option key and drag. And that makes a copy of it. And again, if I hold down the Shift and Option key, from the center outward, I make it a little bit larger. And just move it in place. And again, once again, I want to make sure that these shapes, all 4 of them, become a single entity, one option. So if I click and I drag and I select them all, I'm going to go ahead and hit Command G to group them together. So I have them as I group for later on. Okay. Next thing, we're going to make the little bone shape down here. And this is kind of an oddball way of doing it, but it's okay. It works for us. If I select this line segment tool, and I click and I drag, it as I click, it determines the start point. Then as I move the mouse, it's going to determine the end point. If I want it to be perfectly horizontal, hold down the Shift key, like so, and let go. And it's a very, very thin line. So what I want it to be is to be, the stroke right now is none, but I want it to be really thick. I want it to be 15 points. So 15 points. Very, very fat. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and change the color of it to 10%, so it's very light. Okay. Well, this is a stroke. It's not a filled shape. But what I can do with this is that I can turn it into a filled shape. I can turn it into a rectangle. It is, in fact, a line segment. It is no different than the outline shapes for each of these other objects that I've made. But if I select the path and I go to Object, and I say that I want to outline, where is it here? I want to outline path, and I want to outline stroke. And as soon as I do that, watch what happens. Notice that it is a little rectangular shape. When is this useful? It can be very helpful in some situations. Why they chose to do that here, I don't know. But it's a good introduction to that, just to let you know that you can take paths. Because sometimes there are certain things that you can't do with paths that you can do with shapes and vice versa. So you can start with a path and convert it into a shape. And shapes can have both outline properties and fill properties. Paths can only have strokes, and that's it. They can only have that one property, and that's it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the little ball shapes that go over the corners. So I'm going to go back to, actually I'm going to use a little bit different shape. I'm going to show you a different tool. It's kind of cool. Let me zoom in here a little bit. And I'm going to use, right here, it's called the Shaper tool. And it's an interesting tool. If you prefer kind of drawing by hand or sketching, for example, I wanted to make a square. If I do this, and look at, I'm using my right mouse, but it knows that I'm trying to make a square. Interesting, huh? Now, if I'm trying to make a circle, if I do this, it knew that I was trying to make a circle. So there's my circle shape. So I can go ahead here with this shape. Again, it's using the Shaper tool. And I'm going to make sure that the fill, or the stroke rather, is none. And it's about the right size. I'm not being very precise about this. But I'm going to go ahead and move it over. And using, again, the smart guides, because I want the center of my circle to match the corner. And then I can go ahead again, and I'm going to duplicate that. So let's zoom in so we can see what I'm doing here. And I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I'm going to make a copy of it. And as it goes over the corner, I have that. I'm going to go ahead and make these a little bit smaller. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to make this one a little bit smaller from the center. Shift Option, and then reduce it just a little bit. There you go. Now I'll go ahead and I'll hold down the Option key, hold down the Shift key, and when it aligns on that next intersection, I'll go ahead and copy and make a copy of it. I'm going to go ahead, hold down the Option key, and move it over. And again, where the center intersects the corner, let go of the mouse. Hold down the Option key, drag, and when the center intersects the corner, I've got it. Okay, so now I have my little bone shape here. But again, it's 5 separate shapes that comprise one. There is no stroke, so we only have the fills, so it looks like one combined shape. What I'm going to do to leave them all as separate entities, but as a group, is I'm going to go ahead and hit Command G to turn that into a group. Now, if I feel that my group is a little too big or too long, but look what happens. Notice that it's making the ellipses or the circles turn into ellipses. I don't want that to happen. Now, this is going ahead a little bit. I'm going to ungroup these. And here's another way of approaching this, is that let's say I want to make all of these shapes turn into one, because this is what we're going to do in our lesson tomorrow. But it doesn't hurt to show you today, because it's really kind of cool. This is, I think, it's the shape builder tool. And I think it's one of the best additions that they ever made to Illustrator. So I'm going to select all of these shapes, make sure that they're all selected. And I want to turn them into one. So over to the left, you'll notice that I'm going to use this shape builder tool. And as I highlight and I drag across these, notice that it's taking, and as I drag across each of these, it's actually combining those shapes. Now you can also subtract, but as I do that, it's, you know, as I drag across each of these, it's turning it into one shape. So now it is not 5 separate shapes, it's one. And I think that's, from my perspective, it's a very powerful way to take your basic primitive shapes, your ellipses, your stars, your rectangles, and combine them into something much, much more complex, which is something that you should consider doing when you're working on your math tool. So now I can come back here. And now when I resize it, it's still, you know, that's not what I want. If I hold down the Option key and I resize it, that's not what I want either. So, you know what? I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to all 4 shapes, all 5 shapes. And I just want this to be a little bit smaller. So I'm going to take the center one and I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. And I'm going to take these 2 shapes and I'm going to move them over. There we go. That looks, the proportions look about right. And I'm just going to go ahead and group them together. Okie doke. So the next thing that we're going to make is we're going to make the sail. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to use that shape, that circle shape that I created before. And we're going to use a variety of features with the shaper tool to make our sail. And it's really kind of interesting how they do this. There's, again, there isn't one way of doing it, but it is a pretty smart way of doing it. So I'm going to select the shaper tool again. And I'm going to make my circle. Oops, thought I was trying to make a rectangle. That's not good. No, I don't want that either. Well, maybe there are better ways of doing this. There we go, okay? So now what I need to do is I need to make a copy of it. So I'm going to go ahead and with the move tool, I'm going to go ahead and let's also take off with this tool. I want to make sure that I have no stroke on it. Now I'm going to hold down the Option key and I'm going to move it across and hold down the Shift key so that it's absolutely horizontal, the movement. Now what I want to do is I want to take the rectangle tool, where are we here? Right here. And I'm going to go over the top, and again, using the smart guides, I'm going to start at the top anchor, move across to the next anchor, and then down to the bottom, so that this goes across the center of everything. So I have these 3 shapes. Now what I'm going to do with the shaper tool is if I go ahead and I click and make a squiggly line. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. There you go. Notice that it cut away. It used the circle as a cookie cutter. Let me do that again. So if I just want this to be squared off, if I click and I drag and I make a little squiggly line, it just cuts that off where the rectangle was. However, if I move it across that squiggly kind of line into the intersection of where the circle overlaps the rectangle, it will actually use a circle as a cookie cutter, as a cutter to cut it away from that rectangle. So I'm going to click and drag like so. Notice how it cuts it away. So now I have my sail shape. So we have all of our pieces that we can put together. But before I put all of those together, I'm going to do vary from the book just a little bit. So what I have done is I've already imported a picked image, a ping file. It could be a JPEG. Anyway, it was the one that was over, which one? There we go. It is a ping file. So ping files are bitmaps, they're raster. And what I want to do is I want to add this to my my other document. So I can go ahead and I can copy it. And then I can go to my file here. And I already have it here, but I'm going to delete it and show you, and I can paste it. So here it is. Now, how you turn this into a vector shape is as follows. That it knows when you have a raster, Illustrator knows that when you have a raster image in here. And you can leave it as a raster image, but you do have to remember, are you making your image for print, or are you making it for the web or some other purpose? And the resolution of that image will be very important. By default, it's 300 pixels per inch for ours right now. But what I want to do is I want to rasterize it. So when I select the image, you'll notice at the top here, it says image trace. It knows that this is a raster image. So what I can do instead, though, is I'm going to go to Window, and I'm going to select, where are we here? I want the image trace panel because there are more features in here. So what I'm going to do is select Preview, and it turned it into a black and white by default. And I don't want that. I want it to be a color image. And if I leave the default settings, 30 colors, this has become a grouped vector image now. It is no longer a raster image. And that is another thing that you can use frequently to create your maps. You can start with a photograph and you can determine how many colors you want. I mean, right now the default is 30. What if I want it to be reduced to 8 colors? Now it's only 8 colors, and each one of these shapes has been turned into a vector. I'm going to leave it the 30, the default. Okay, and I can go ahead and I can close my image trace because I don't need it anymore. So this is no longer, I can expand this if I wish. I don't need to for our purposes right now, but if I wanted to manipulate each of these individual shapes, I would want to expand it. Let me, how are we doing on time? Oh boy, it's 11 o'clock. Let me try to speed this up a little bit. So what I want to do is I want to take this shape and I want to put it inside this shape. So I'm going to select Copy, or Command X to cut. Then I'm going to select this shape. And down at the bottom here where it says Draw Normal, I'm going to say Draw Inside. And notice how the outside of this changes just a little bit. How we have this broken dotted line on the quarters. And now what I can do is I can go to Edit, and I can say Paste. And if I double click, and there we go, it's pasted inside that irregular shape that was made. Now let's try another thing. That what we want to do is we want to create a background color. So for this shape, if I select it, instead of draw inside, I'm going to say I want to draw behind. And now when I draw a rectangle, and I zoom in a little bit, and I don't have the, it will automatically draw behind it. Okay? So now the next step for all of us is to take all of these shapes that we've created, and we can go ahead and move them over, and we can rotate them and duplicate them as needed using the examples in the book to create our finished illustration. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll continue to there we go. Let's go ahead and copy this. Copy, and I'm going to edit. So the only thing that I'm going to do now, and I'll try to talk as I'm doing this. Let me undo that. I want to go ahead and rotate this. I'll just go ahead and make these shapes ahead of time and group them. So I'm going to rotate, hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to copy, and I'm going to say edit. I'm going to try to go through this quickly. I'm going to go ahead and say paste in front, and I'm going to rotate again, hold down the Shift key to lock it in place. I'm going to select both of them, and I'm going to group them. So I have that as a group. This one's already a group. I need to take my sail now. Okay, I'll take this one that I made before. Put that in place. Now notice that the sail is behind the mast. Well, that doesn't help me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Object Arrange and say bring the front. So now it's in front of it. And I want stroke to be none. So I'll do that. And I can also resize it a little bit. Maybe it does need to be a little bit larger. So I can reconfigure it. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn this into a group as well. Command G for group. And now we can go ahead and we can take and we can begin to put our little illustration together. So I'll take this and move it over. Shift Option to begin to shrink it down in size a little bit, put it in place. I'll take this one and put it over here. And again, Shift Option and click and drag, put it in place. A little bit smaller. And we need to take our little diamond shapes. Okay. Take this one. We're going to move that over. And again, Shift Option to make it smaller from here. And we'll make a, hold down the Option key and drag to make another one. What else do we have here? We have a little skull and crossbones. So we'll move that over here. Shift Option and click and drag to make it a little bit smaller. And I can fiddle with the sizes a little bit later. Am I forgetting anything? Oh, the mountains. We have our mountain shapes. So here's a mountain shape here. And I can go ahead and I can begin to work with colors. And I can hold down the Option key to duplicate. Okay, and I can make that a little bit darker, and I can make that smaller if we want. And maybe I can put that one behind, so I can hit the Command key, and then the left bracket key, and that puts it behind it. Or I could have used the layers. We can take this one again, and I can make a duplicate of it. So I'll hold down the Option key, drag, and let's make this a little bit different color. And Shift Option, reduce the size of that a little bit. This has a snap on right now, and I don't like that. So I'm going to go to View, and it says, maybe it's snap to grid. No. I thought maybe snap was turned on. I'm going to zoom in a little bit to get a better handle on all of this. So I don't know that my mountain range is looking the same as theirs. We can go ahead and change that a little bit. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and group all of these together. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. Select this one, and this one. Command G for group. Hold down the Option key, click and drag, and put this down here. And again, we can resize all of these. And that's the nice thing about working, one of the nice things about working with Illustrator is that these can be sized any way you like it, placed in position here. So we have a reasonable facsimile of what we're, the final project here. Probably not exactly, but I want yours to be pretty close. So use the examples in the book and the size that they've given you, so that we have, so that it tells me that you know pretty clearly how to manipulate these tools. So I think I've done this pretty well today. A few glitches, but overall not bad. You tell me. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for the moment. I'll continue to record. But you tell me, is there anything more that you'd like me to do or redo? I know that some of you had to probably leave. Let me continue to make sure that I have everybody here. So, and Emily and Malik. So I'm taking roll at the moment. Vanessa, Korea, and am I missing anybody? And Deborah Fontes. Anybody else? Anything? So it's just it's various ways of taking the basic primitive shapes that they make available to us over here. I'm not sharing my screen, so let me do that again. Yeah, it's taking the basic shapes that we have over here, starting with a rectangle tool. We use the Ellipse tool, we use the Polygon tool, we use the Star tool to create various shapes, and we created them in a variety of ways using the Properties panel, mostly to really vary them and to be very precise with them. We also use the Shaper tool, we use the Eraser tool. We're always using the Select tool, the Direct Select tool, to create the shapes that we need. And we use the live, I guess they're called live shapes now, to round off corners and that sort of thing. And you can always go back and change them. You can always go back and edit the colors, edit the sizes, and even after you group them, you can change them. You can do what you want with them. It's never ending. It depends on what you want to do. We also learned briefly how we can draw inside another shape, which is pretty cool. And if you're wondering, for example, how they got this irregular shape outside here, let me show you that really quickly. Is that you can take a basic rectangle, like so, and I can go up to Effects, and we can go to Distort, and I can use a feature called Roughen. And there you go. We can control how detailed and how rough we want that to be. That's basically how they did that. So do you want corners, or do you want smooth, rounded? You can control all of that. So that's basically how they made that little irregular shape for the map to the left. They didn't draw that by hand. However, if you want a very precise shape, you can do that. You can draw it by hand, but if it's the irregularity of it is sort of random and it's not that critical, then that would be a good way to do that. So that's pretty cool. I mean, there's a lot of things that we haven't really covered yet. But, we're getting into the program, pretty deep, pretty quickly to be able to create all of these things. The least favorite for me, though, is the shaper tool. The shape builder tool, I think, is incredible, that we'll be using extensively in our lesson tomorrow. The shaper tool I'm not so crazy about. It was originally intended to be used on like iPads or touchpad screens, that if you're drawing with a stylus or your finger or something, that's how you can control the shapes that way. That make a perfect circle or rectangle or square. Okay, so I'll go ahead and I'll stop sharing again. But I'm still recording. So no chats, no questions. So we've gone on over a little bit, 15 minutes today. Yeah, question?
I have a question.
Okay.
So we have to follow what you did, or we can do our own style? Can we use our own style, or do we change the colors, or do we have to follow specifically what the book says?
When we're doing the lessons, try to follow the book closely. Very easily everybody could cheat, and I know that. All you have to do is open the end file, and you could rename it, and you could put it on Google Drive and say, I did the file. But that doesn't help you. And where that will come out is that when I have you do the assignment, if you're struggling with the assignment, then I'll know that you're struggling and really didn't do the lesson. So if you want to vary a little bit with colors and things like that, but try to follow the textbook closely, just so that you have experience using the tools the way they've done. Because I don't know how well I described using them today when I was going through it, but the properties panel, there's a lot of hidden features that allow you, for example, when I wanted to turn the triangle back into an equilateral triangle, when I wanted to round the corners separately for the rectangle, how to do that, that's all there. And those panels, and they're hard to find unless you know where to look. Does that make sense? But
Okay.
if you want to change the colors up a little bit or sizes a little bit, the sizes, I don't know why they're so precise with them. Usually when you're doing an illustration yourself, if it's if you're focusing more on aesthetics, then it's not that critical, you know, exact sizes, because you can always resize them and reconfigure them to your design, you know, any way you like. It does become more of an issue when you're working in programs like Photoshop, where that is a raster program and the resolution stuff is more critical. So that's all.
Okay, so after I finish my lesson, so I upload it to Google Drive.
Yep. Make sure. I think I remember you already created your folder in Google Drive. Just put the original Illustrator files that you've created inside that folder, and I'll know whose they. You don't need to rename them. I'll know whose they are because they're inside your folder.
Okay. Okay. So upload my lessons, and then the third thing. There's 3 things, right? What was the third thing that we had to do? Which lessons? 1, 2, 3. Let me see.
For Thursday, we're going to work on lesson 4. And then I would like everybody over the weekend to start the mask assignment if you haven't started it already. And then on Monday, I believe we're going to work on lesson 5. And then Wednesday, we'll work on lesson 6. I might, in fact, you know what? I might change the order of that because lesson 6 is more important. So yeah, I'm going to change the order of that. Next week, we're going to do lesson 6 first, and on Monday, which should, if you master that quickly, should help everybody in working on your mask assignment. And then we're going to work on lesson 5 on Wednesday, which is transforming artwork, which is important. But we've already done some of that already, and it shows, it demonstrates in that lesson a few more sophisticated ways of transforming objects and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
So pay attention to this week in class because I'm going to change that up for next week.
Okay, thank you.
So we good for today? Anybody? Well, fine.
Yes, I'm good.
Okay.
Yes, I'm good.
So I'll wait for a few people to log off, and then I'll sign out myself.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. See you tomorrow.
Take care.
Bye-bye.